What constitutes the remaking of a video game? Should a perfect game be remade? If so, does that mean that it wasn't perfect to begin with? Hell yes it is! Or should Capcom take a game with negative reception and fix, or remake, it from the ground up? Or is it just about money? Ever since Capcom announced a remake to Resident Evil 3 after the ridiculous reception of Resident Evil 2 Remake, there has been unending speculation as to which Resident Evil game Capcom should remake next. Frequent suggestions include Resident Evil 5, an over-the-shoulder remake to Resident Evil 1, and of course, the top contender, Code Veronica. At the top of that list was always Resident Evil 4, and for great reason. Resident Evil 4 was an instant classic that revolutionized not only the Resident Evil franchise, but third-person over-the-shoulder shooters as well as gaming in general. It was a gaming culture phenom. Therefore, Capcom followed through with fan demands and remade the classic Resident Evil 4 into another classic remake. Shh! Do y'all hear that? Is that? Yup. That's a giant but coming. But Resident Evil 4 didn't deserve a remake. At least not yet. Same goes for RE5. Both games still look and play fantastic on the new gen consoles. Except for these controls that can get pretty annoying sometimes. Plus, with no major changes to story or lore, RE4 Remake is basically a rejuvenated version of RE4. Who's to say the same won't be true for an RE5 remake? Resident Evil 2 and 3 Remake's existence can be justified by the lack of playability of their original titles on newer consoles, along with an upgrade in graphics, of course. I personally would have been fine with ports or remasters of these games, but a remake? Now that's going the extra mile. Oh, and to clarify, I too would love to play remakes to Code Veronica, RE5, Operation Raccoon City, Outbreak, and just all of them. I get goosebumps just thinking about it. Feed me more Resident Evil content, and remake RE3 properly.
Fuck you.
But a game whose name doesn't get put into the remake hat as often is Resident Evil 0. And to that I ask, why? Resident Evil 0 follows Rebecca Chambers the day before the Spencer Mansion incident in the Arklay Mountains outside of Raccoon City. As the medic of SARS Bravo team, Rebecca was in their helicopter during the crash that fatal day. She, along with the rest of Bravo team, make their way into the Spencer Mansion, where we witness each member fall one by one in the respective areas where we encounter them in Resident Evil. At least, that's how I expected the game to unfold. I believe Resident Evil wrote itself into a corner on this one. Bravo team didn't make it very far into the mansion, and those who did couldn't have accessed areas without solving puzzles that we solved while progressing. Anyway, we follow the barely legal member of Bravo team. Okay, let me rephrase that. We follow the youngest member of Bravo team and stars in general as a fatal scene leads her to explore a mysteriously halted train nearby, the Ecliptic Express. A rail train used by Umbrella to transport its employees to the other one of its training facilities in the outskirts of Raccoon City. As we'll come to find out, the train was sabotaged by a disgruntled employee and his squishy suckies. Following the steps of an escaped prisoner and primary suspect behind the overflipped military transport, Rebecca eventually finds herself at the train's final destination, a training facility for future executives within the Umbrella Corporation. Or more accurately, a derivative of the Spencer Mansion because they couldn't use the actual Spencer Mansion as backdrop, as that would create way too many story inconsistencies. Rebecca faces off against the giant-sized versions of tiny creatures, varying types of leeches, leapy boys, a proto-tyrant, and a few classic foes. We learn more about what led to the outbreak in RE1 and are privy to some behind-the-scenes scheming. Rebecca, along with the escaped prisoner, Billy Cohen, defeats the Queen Leech, part ways, makes her way into the Spencer Mansion, and into an entirely new nightmare. Resident Evil 0 plays with the tank controls and fixed camera angles that are trademarks of the early Resident Evil games. For the most part, it feels like an updated Resident Evil 1, so like Resident Evil Remake, but with character swaps. And speaking of swapping, RE0 is unique amongst Resident Evil games in that it implements the character swapping system, and at will, real-time character swapping mechanic between Rebecca and co-protagonist Billy for virtually the entirety of the game. Items can be organized as the player wishes amongst the the inventory of both characters and can be swapped at will when in close proximity. The game does away with item boxes in favor of simply dropping the item at the character's feet, which can be extremely useful or can place you in a bind running back to the room you dropped an item if you happen to need it in a distant area. But it's mostly helpful. Overall, it's a fun game. More of the same, but when that same is only the greatest game in gaming, I welcome more of the same. Unfortunately, immediately following Remake may have been this game's downfall. I'm sure I'm not alone in this, but on the eve of my first playthrough, I believe this game would focus not only on Rebecca, but on the entirety of Bravo Team, just as RE1 focused on Alpha Team. I expected to witness the downfall of each, or at least some of its members. But all that we're allotted is a few scenes with Enrico and Dewey, and when I say a few, I mean a few. Most of our interactions occur with newcomer and Res exclusive Billy Cohen. Now don't get me wrong, Billy has an interesting backstory. The character design is a little tryhard.
Oh, I see. You're with stars.
But it's still an interesting character nonetheless. I just feel as though Rebecca would have been better paired with Richard or Enrico, someone who could actually mentor her and not just treat her like some
little girl.
Which was somewhat explored in Chronicles. Maybe she could even be paired with Forrest. After all, it does feel like Billy may have started off as Forrest, but then transitioned into an original character. Playing alongside Sullivan, Forrest, and Marini before their downfall would have been an interesting joyride. Now again, you can't do much in the mansion because all of the puzzles need to be unsolved and all of the doors locked by the time Alpha Team arrive. But there's plenty of evidence to suggest that Bravo Team, despite an entire 24-hour departure heads up, has also just arrived. One of the many aspects that added to the nostalgia of older video games was the appreciation one felt as a consumer of these products. When you bought a game, you didn't just purchase the game, you received an experience. You got a cool little booklet with necessary playing mechanics, but it also included other little extras. RE6 included these cool little character decals, at least one GTA title included an entire map of the playable city, and the original Resident Evil included these character bios. Now, all you get is this. And if games do include a little something as an extra, it's bundled into a collector's edition. The manual included bios for not only Alpha Team, but for Bravo Team as well. Combine that with the manner in which we come across them in RE1, and you have what we call lore. Many questions were raised before the rise of the internet and online forums, or before everyone had access to them. Whose hand did Joseph find? Who fired that first gunshot? How did this beast of a man fall victim to the slowest type of enemy? Was Forrest better than Chris? How did Bravo Team work as a unit? Who were they? And of course, how did Rebecca make it this far? These are some of the questions that you may presume RE0 would answer, but no. Instead, it answers the question, who is the third Umbrella founder? How can leeches contribute to a zombie franchise? How many leeches is too many leeches? These are some of the mistakes that a Resident Evil 0 remake could rectify. A remake is by definition a reinvention of the wheel. It's not a port nor a remaster, meaning that many, most, or all of the elements can be completely changed. A remake is a prime opportunity to fix every issue with RE0, and issues there are aplenty. The aforementioned sapping mechanic, to me, just feels like a gimmick that would have worked better as co-op. Or let me rephrase that, a feature that could work better as co-op. Not mandatory co-op, but maybe I have a younger sibling who wants to dabble in the sweet world of survival horror type co-op. I know some people like the mechanic, but I typically only ever stick to either or. So it's really just extra inventory space and more firepower. AKA, it only makes the game that much easier. So if you can't reuse the Spencer estate, then what do you do as far as a setting? You and a fellow player could crash land into the Arklay Mountains in search of cannibal gangs, only to come across a different sort of cannibal gangs. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. the sapping mechanic can be implemented between Bravo team members and not just between Rebecca and Billy. I know Rebecca's at the bottom of everyone's favorite character list, along with this entry in general, so this is a perfect opportunity to flesh out their story, to flesh out their personality. We've only ever seen Richard in full capacity, but received only snippets of Enrico and Dewey, even less so of the others. We can work alongside them at the beginning, but gradually separate once we reach the training facility, then play out like the other games where the rest of the team appears only occasionally. And I would trade off some areas in the training facility in favor of more time in the Arklay Forest. Oh yeah, remember what set this entire franchise into motion? It wasn't an escaped convict, it was reports of bizarre attacks. A fact that is immediately forgotten as soon as Bravo team comes across the upturned Jeep and learn about Billy, who, in the likes of beloved RE side characters, could provide occasional assistance, instead of him sticking around all the time. And instead of him being a red herring for the death of the MPs, he could be a red herring for the bizarre attacks. So the initial area of gameplay can take place within the Arklay Forest as we look for the would-be perpetrator. We can spend the beginning of the game searching the forest for clues, eventually catching up to Billy, but being cornered by the true culprits, zombies, and being forced to join forces to survive, only for the gunshots to attract bad num-nums and forcing the team onto a nearby train, the Ecliptic Express. No longer bound by confined spaces and tank controls to make an area more challenging, the Ecliptic Express is no longer needed. However, it does offer a different setting and mood, plus nostalgia, and I do believe it's iconic to RE0 as a whole, even though it's only a tutorial stage of sorts, so it can stay. From here on out, the rest of the remake could play similar to OG Res with only a few minor changes. Firstly, these bosses need a serious overhaul. They can remain giant versions of small creatures, but the dynamic of the actual battles needs to be reworked, preferably by taking the newer game style into consideration. Boss battles have always been a point of contention for most RE games, and the recent remakes have made vast improvements over the originals. I'm not sure about the whole leech thing. A little leech is okay, but not too leechy. And toned down Marcus just a tad. Aside from that, the training facility and water treatment plants are fun areas to explore. And the similarity of the training facility in Resident Evil 0 to the Spencer Mansion could give us a feel of what an over-the-shoulder Resident Evil 1 remake could look like. I debated this next portion for some time now. What would be a good way to end a Resident Evil 0 remake? Should it conclude in the same manner as OG Res, with Rebecca staring into the mansion in the distance, unaware of the nightmare after the nightmare? Or should we get to see firsthand how each member of Bravo team fell? Honestly, why can't we do both? My only issue with the latter would be ending the game in the middle of the next game's storyline, while being a crucial part of that storyline. But then, how would we find out how an expert marksman was overwhelmed by small and radically moving targets? How did Enrico discover the existence of a traitor amongst his ranks? And what was his reaction to losing his team along with possibly the youngest member under his command? What I'm saying is, the possibility for character development is abundant. We could conclude the game much like OG Res with a happy, albeit misplaced, optimism. Rebecca bids farewell to Billy, but instead of heading towards the mansion, she reunites with Bravo team. Upon delivering Billy's status as KIA, the team look to the mansion to continue their investigation. Bravo team scenarios in the mansion could be added as DLC or unlocked after completion of the primary game, with each member having their pros and cons, a la Ghost Survivors. I do believe that would certainly be better than Leech Hunter. Or screw it, just do both. Being a prequel, it would be interesting to meet some of the researchers before they switch teams to the undead. We can have that first Richard v. Jan fight and get to see how half-man, half-bear Sullivan was outflanked by head-turn zombie. As much as I would like to explore Bravo team as a whole, this is Rebecca's story. So the most significant change a Res remake needs to make is to mature Rebecca some. I get it. The game came out in 2002 and was set in the mid-90s, before horror games became so serious. Rebecca's most commonly known amongst fans for being Shinji Mikami's most hated character, to the point that he was even willing to kill her off in a prequel. As in, kill her off in an installment that comes chronologically before an installment with a confirmed appearance that is not a flashback. Now, Rebecca does not need Chris Redfield levels of gruffiness, but she can be a little less whiny. Her positive and playful attitude in the face of danger was perfected with Claire in Resident Evil 2. I blame Rebecca's annoyance in RE1 mainly on the exaggerated voice acting. It's no secret that Resident Evil 1 had comically executed voice acting that was vastly rectified by its remake. Similarly, a remake can rectify Rebecca's personality by making her more vulnerable than childish, more gleeful than annoying. The original Resident Evil 0 created a giant character inconsistency. Rebecca went from surviving her own nightmare on equal footing to Billy Cohen, a Marine Corps Force Recon lieutenant and combat veteran, to becoming, well...
Oh no!
I do believe there needs to be a larger incident to justify this drastic inconsistency. Yeah, I hear ya, hindsight and all. But I do believe a remake can at least address that infamous moment where Rebecca was gnawed on by an eliminator. Maybe in this moment, Billy can join forces with Richard or the rest of Bravo team and find a cure for Rebecca. Yes, just like Carlos with Jill. And because of this infection and everything else she went through, she's much weaker and fatigued in Resident Evil 1. So maybe have this moment towards the end of the game, but before the final boss. More than likely, the next remake will be either Code Veronica or Resident Evil 5. Seeing as to how the remakes have gone in succession, RE2, RE3, RE4, it's fairly certain that the next remake in line will be RE5. Another entry that doesn't yet merit a remake. But of course, I am excited for all entries to be remade. And I mean all. However, if we go by which mainline Resident Evil game would benefit from a remake the most, rather than it just being a cash grab, then Resident Evil 0 should definitely be at the top of the list. Not only is it prime opportunity for more Raccoon nostalgia, but also for an exploration of Raccoon Forest, the Arklay Mountains, an intimate dive into STAR's Bravo team during their final moments as they investigate the incident that set the entire franchise into motion, but also to rectify one of Resident Evil's most vulnerable and underrated protagonists. A Resident Evil 0 remake could do for Resident Evil 0 what its predecessor did for the progenitor of the series, and hopefully not what the remake did for Nemesis. And give us that unique, nostalgic Resident Evil experience that we've all been craving for like a horde of mindless zombies. And that's why I believe that Resident Evil 0 should be the game that Capcom remakes next. Now I have to go play Warzone. I love you, bye!